Welcome, everybody. Thanks for being here. Today, I am with an old friend and colleague, a women's health Ayurveda practitioner, Adena. And she has been working at the Ayurvedic Center of Vermont for 15 years, where she has been one of my Panchakarma therapists at one time. She does hands on work, including Maya abdominal therapy, as well as the Ayurvedic therapies. And Adina has been an Ayurvedic practitioner working primarily in reproductive health, supporting women in all stages of life. And she's guiding women with fertility questions, as well as learning about healing from painful and irregular menstrual cycles. Her aspiration is really to share vital self-healing tools so women can feel empowered to manage hormonal imbalances and again the irregular painful menstrual cycles. And that's really what I wanted to bring her on today, was to hear about what are the tools that Adena ends up recommending the most. Like, what is she finding works? And that's what we're going to talk about. We also get in depth about vaginal steaming. That is something that I've been curious about. I hope that you are too, because Adena and I talk about how and what this practice is for. So don't go anywhere, because we're talking with someone who has years of clinical experience, and we want to hear what she has to say about women's health right after this. Welcome to Everyday Ayurveda with Kate, a podcast that translates ancient wisdom for modern lives. I'm your host, Kate O'Donnell. I've been living and teaching Ayurveda, India's traditional medicine, for over 25 years, and I've authored 4 best-selling books on bringing Ayurveda practices into our lives. If you're tired of battling digestive issues, hormonal imbalances, menopause symptoms, or are seeking a deeper spiritual connection and purpose, you're in the right place. This podcast is for you, offering practical, accessible advice to help you heal through diet, optimize your daily routines, and enhance your overall well-being. Follow this space for insights on a diet that heals, strategies for better digestion, sleep, hormone health, and direction for finding a deep sense of meaning and purpose. Join me, my pod people, for this empowering journey into self-care and self-discovery. Together, we'll explore how to bring balance and vitality into your everyday life. Let's do this. Hi, Adena of Adena Rose Ayurveda. Good to have you with us today.
Hey, Kate. So glad to be here with you.
So, folks, Adena and I have known each other a long time. We have some similarities in our yoga background. We're also both Ayurvedic practitioners. And I wanted to have Adena on the show for 2 reasons. One is because she spends a good deal of time in a clinical practice working primarily in women's health. So there's a lot of questions I want to ask Adena today about that. And also, we've been having this conversation going back and forth, Adena, about yoni steaming. So I think we're curious. So we'll get around to that in a little bit. But before we jump into that topic, I was curious to hear. I always notice in my practice, like, you go through times where you start to see a lot of similar client issues. It's like they come in these clusters, you know? So I'm curious, because you're doing a lot more one-to-one practice than I am right now. So I'm curious, like, what are you seeing as far as women's health concerns? What are people experiencing right now?
I work with a lot of women, supporting them on their fertility journey. And that sounds like it falls under one category, but everyone comes with a different showing or experience, even though their intention and their goal is fertility, pregnancy. So when we're working in the fertility journey, I'm talking a lot about what someone's menstrual cycle looks like, and that can really range, but that is the field, let's say. So we want to be sure that the soil, the field of the womb, is kind of ripe and ready to go. So we're doing a lot of focus on menstrual health and in that regards.
Yeah. So things like cramping or irregular cycles.
Yeah, there could certainly be cramping. When it comes to fertility, it's being sure that we're ovulating, really. So it's like learning about our fertility signs and knowing when we are ovulating so that we can try at the right window. Sometimes that means working around assisted reproductive technologies as well. If someone was going to, yeah. Anyway, so learning about our fertility signs and our cycles and what that looks like. And that could mean because someone has irregular cycles, they don't know when they're ovulating. So it's like, let's be sure that you are and what that looks like. You could have really heavy bleeding. You could have really short cycles. And it's like, well, are you ovulating or not? So it could look differently, but that's really, especially with, natural conception, knowing and when you're ovulating and catching that.
Right, right. So when you talk about knowing when you're ovulating, I think about basal thermometer. Is that a big part of?
That's one of the tools, and maybe it's actually the second, or in conjunction with the second tool that I use. First is learning about our cervical fluid and knowing what that means and how to see it and how to notice that. And then, and usually in conjunction with the taking your temperature, because that will tell you if you're in your follicular pre-ovulatory phase or post-ovulatory. And when we link that up with the cervical fluid, we can really know when the peak days are for conception. And then there's a third tool, which I really only teach to women who are pretty excited about this because it's pretty intimate. It's feeling your cervix. And the cervix actually moves and changes texture, and the cervical os, the opening, changes around ovulation as well. But if you really want to get serious about knowing your body, learning those three signs can really confirm, okay, yes, like my body told me I ovulated, rather than just using like the ovulation kit, which is reading hormonal shifts, but it's not, to me, I don't really trust it. I really want to see the signs from the body.
Right, right. So you're talking about kind of just feeling around in there.
Literally feeling around in there.
Mucus, yeah.
Well, so cervical mucus is, you don't actually have to touch or reach inside your body usually to learn about your cervical mucus, cervical fluid. When you're in that fertile window, almost always, you're probably seeing some just on your underwear or just when you wipe after urination, and you can see, and there's different textures and, a whole process of flowing through that fertile time. But it doesn't have to actually be that internal if someone wasn't ready for that or interested in that.
So if you find that someone's not ovulating, what are the reasons that you come across for that?
Well, since we're coming from the Ayurvedic perspective, we really think it's appropriate to first utilize the understanding in the language of the doshas. So we're looking at it, okay, which dosha is dominant in their imbalance. So we're taking in a whole intake, right, of like how's your digestion, elimination, looking at your body type, pulse, tongue, things like that. And then, of course, if we're talking about conception and ovulation, we're in those childbearing years. So we're asking about menstruation and looking at the patterns, the qualities will tell me, okay, which dosha seems to be the most out of balance right now. And then thinking about how to bring that back into balance, of course. And there's a wide range of tools. For example, if someone was not ovulating, it can look different. Someone could be not ovulating and they have very irregular cycles, like they're going 3 months without a cycle, and then they have really light bleeding, or they go 3 months without a cycle and then they have a waterfall of bleeding and it's more dangerous. So it's like the first one might be more of a vata and kapha type pattern, where the second one would be more of maybe like a kapha and pitta type pattern. So it's really looking at what the patterns are. Someone could also be not ovulating and bleeding every 2 weeks, and that would most certainly fall into more like a pitta vata type pattern. So it's very individual, even if there's just a diagnosis of not ovulating, right?
Right.
And looking at that pattern and assessing what tools or herbs or things could be supportive to, right? We think of it as bringing the hormones back into balance, but like the hormones, and using that language of hormones is still like Western anatomy and physiology, which I certainly know, but when I find myself crossing over into that line too far, I feel like I'm getting away from my area of expertise. Or like
Yes.
even my area of it can be almost too, it becomes less embodied. Do you know what I mean? I think for me, when I
Yeah.
start talking about it in that way.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Yes, because one of the I think the ways that we learn about menstrual cycles and ovulation is due to things like follicular stimulating hormone. So, we have this sort of very
Yeah.
digital language to describe, the reasons behind things and
Yeah.
why we ovulate when we do and this and that. And people are curious, we want to know like why that happens. Like why is the mucus like that? What does that mean? And when you say that you're looking for patterns of doshas in the cycle, just for those who aren't familiar, it's like you're looking for dryness. Like the blood might be like dark and
Yeah.
dry, or the
Yep.
cycle's very long. So it takes a long time between cycles to get the next one. It could be hot, right? That would be like our pitta type thing.
Yep.
So where there's like a raging, as you say, kind of really heavy cycle, or there's like really a lot of heat in the body. Or if in a kapha type pattern, we might see more like a stagnation, pain, more of a feeling of blocking in the
Yeah.
cycle.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, so I put a checklist in the Everyday Ayurveda for Women's Health about that in the Healthy Menstruation
Great.
chapter, because as you say, this embodied language for understanding what's going on with menstrual cycles is, I think, really helpful and kind of stands from a different vantage point than the Western perspective, which we get. I feel like maybe I'm jaded, but I feel like we get more of that than we do. Like you have to really go looking for a holistic perspective on women's health right now.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a lot of talk about hormones. There's a lot of talk about hormone replacement therapies. There's just a lot of this conversation of understanding our bodies through this language of hormones, which has become really popular. And there are a lot of people out there doing great work making that language more accessible. And I'm hearing you say, you've been trained as like myself in this Indian knowledge system, like a completely sort of different way of understanding the body. And it's embodied language that has to do with sort of the felt experience qualities in the body and
Yeah.
like what those are telling us. So when we start like using the modern scientific language, it pulls us away from that. Right. So
Yeah.
it's tricky because I'm trying to like pull people in by talking about like hormone replacement therapy. It's like because I know they know what that is. I know they've heard of that. Do you find that a lot of your clients are like, how do they find you? How do they end up at a holistic practitioner for these types of imbalances?
Yeah. Good question. And if I don't get back to that, remind me, because what you were sharing was just reminding me that I think it's helpful and important to know what a like healthy and normal menstrual cycle looks like. And that might involve understanding kind of broadly, like, okay, what is there are phases of my cycle, and I can call them follicular phase, or I can call them like kapha phase, right? Or I can call them
Yep.
ovulatory phase, I can call it luteal phase, or like pitta phase, I can call it the menstrual phase or vata phase. And I know
Mm-hmm.
that, oh, estrogen's higher, the follicular phase, progesterone's higher at the luteal phase, etc. It's also great to know that Ayurveda has a standard of what a healthy cycle looks like. And that is in relation to like the doshic wheel and rhythm. Like we know there's a dinacharya, a daily rhythm of the doshas. We know there's ritucharya, the seasonal rhythm of the doshas around this wheel of the year. And there's also, if we're in a female body, a cyclical body, there are rhythms to the menstrual cycle. So there's this awesome other layer. And we can also know that I think it's Dr. Claudia. Maybe I've almost adopted it myself now because she's a big influence, for both of us, I know, but for me as well, about like normal abnormality. Like it's
Yes.
normal to see vata dosha imbalance happen during the autumn time. It's normal to see vata influences during the menstrual phase of our cycle, just because there's the dominant of those doshas. So I think that's helpful. And that could include knowing a little bit about the hormones also. But once we start to get too nitty gritty or like deep into it, it can be like, oh, we're like a machine. So, okay, I have low progesterone, so I just need to plug in more progesterone. And it's like, well, that's not
Right.
really an option. I mean,
Mm.
yes, it is, I guess, but it's a pretty powerful and maybe an option that we utilize down the line because it's a pharmaceutical. They're really strong, subtle drugs that affect us very strongly systemically.
I do like this conversation about the difference between an Ayurveda language to talk about cycles and the hormonal language. And I sort of liken like the progesterone example that you gave to, in some cases, introducing an invasive species into an ecosystem. So when we kind of take one hormone out of the story and say, this is the problem, where, as you're pointing out, hormones exist in relationship to each other,
Yeah.
so it's this very like subtle, massive web of how they interact each other. And so when you change one, it's like when you put the beetle in the vineyard on the grapes, and then that beetle's affecting the ants or, whatever it is. So that's where I think sometimes why these alternative therapies are so important to me and getting the word out about them. So one of the things I'm really wondering is how do people end up with you? Have they already been through a Western route and it was uncomfortable or it wasn't working, and then they look for holistic, or are they finding you first as an alternative? Are they using both in tandem with each other?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that back. So I will say that it's a wide range. I'm really encouraged that there are more women who are coming to me first, because I think that is my ideal place, I think. Especially, let's say, talk about fertility and conception. Ideally in Ayurveda, it's a conscious conception, because we know that the doshic state of balance or imbalance of the parents that come together, when the egg and sperm come together, whatever is present there is going to be carried forward in the offspring. So ideally that the parents are as healthy and as balanced as possible. So conscious conception could start a year, 6 months ahead of time with like a Panchakarma and Rasayana. Like there's a whole process, so that we are bringing in the healthiest, child possible. And so when I say they're coming to me at the beginning, meaning it could be a 6 months or a year ahead of time, their conception journey, and maybe they haven't even tried yet or started yet, and they're really being mindful and bringing that in. And I feel like that is the most wonderful place. That's the most ideal place to be as an Ayurvedic practitioner, starting people on their journey. And then you can start with really gentle things. And this also means that they both sort of trust that this is what their body is designed to do. A healthy body is designed to be able to procreate. So we're trusting that the body is starting at that baseline, that we trust that that's possible. And then along the journey, we can find out if and when more intimate or invasive, let's say, type things are needed. But I'm not assuming that needs to happen. And then there are certainly many people who come to me after they have maybe started a fertility journey with who you might think to go to first is your gynecologist, let's say, or your doctor, right? If you're looking for support. And then it immediately became, I think you used this word before we were talking earlier, disappointing. And that could have been because maybe they had hoped for, but not really known intellectually, hoped for some like maybe emotional support or some excitement or some just general health and well-being advice. And then it immediately became, oh my gosh, I might have a fertility issue. Like it suddenly becomes a problem. And that's part of our Western medical model is you go and they're looking for problems. And that's actually okay. That's just part of what they're doing. So then women may have gone into that, and if they're listening to their intuition and it doesn't feel right, then they kind of pull back and they'll come to me. Or they've gone down the road because that's what they felt supported with. They went all the way through maybe IVF multiple times and that really didn't work. and then they're coming to me. And that's also welcome and that's fine. But there's also like we're at a different level and maybe like emotional level at that point, because that is a really trying place to be. And then there are women who come to me when they're post-menopause and they're like, I wish I knew about you. I wish I knew about this when I was having children,
I
like
hear
how
that a lot
different my
too.
journey could have been, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I hear that a lot too from postmenopausal
Yeah.
women. Yeah. They're like, oh, I wish I had known about this modality when I
Yeah.
was going through perimenopause. Yeah. Do you work with a lot of women in perimenopause
I am
transitions?
starting to, because I am in my 40s now.
Yeah.
So it's really, for me, what feels right and ripe to me is what I'm living and living in my body. And that just is what I'm doing the experiment with. So I feel like I can share really authentically. And that seems to be, I imagine you'd probably feel the same. It's like I like to go to practitioners who are kind of like one or two steps ahead of me and they're living through it and they really can share from, their clinical practice, but they're also like really using it in their body and can share all those little nitty-gritty details and,
Yeah.
of what it really means to live through it.
Right. Right. Which perimenopause, I'm seeing a lot of hot flashes, changes in the periods for sure that
Yeah.
are disconcerting. When it starts getting shorter, or women who were bleeding for weeks at a time. That's exhausting. And as you said, can be dangerous. Also, interestingly, sort of changes in the mindscape, in the direction of anxiety. And I think that is going hand in hand with sleep difficulties a lot of the time, too. Is this similar to what you're seeing?
Yes. Yeah. And I was just talking with Larissa this morning about like the wonderful, like knowing like I love the cycles within cycles and seeing that when we are coming into this perimenopausal time, it's like we are in our luteal phase of our cycle. So a lot of times, these things that come up during perimenopause may have started to creep in as we got a little bit older during the luteal phase of our cycles. And we know from the doshas, right? It's like pitta, but pitta, vata pushing pitta sort of coming on. So
Right.
yes, a
That
lot of
second
it,
half of the
yeah,
cycle where things
that
start to
second
get
half of the
hotter.
cycle. Yep.
Yeah. 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 That's interesting. I like that analogy. That makes sense. So what kind of things might we look for in the luteal cycle when we're, say, in our early 40s?
Yeah, and this is the luteal cycle in every month, no matter your age. I think as we get older, we get more sensitive, and whether that's due to like just less ojas or lower resiliency or just more dosha because more life, we might see that more. But pitta imbalances can be some of those things you mentioned, like heat, hot flashes, night sweats. A lot of times it's anger, frustration, short temper, and
Yep.
mood. Yep. It's sometimes the dryness can come. Well, and then either early bleeding, let's say, like shorter cycles, or much heavier bleeding. And as you mentioned, some of the dryness coming in too, and that can be like dry eyes, dry skin, dry yoni.
Yep.
Yeah.
Definitely. I see the dry thing a lot in my community as well. Not to mention in my own body.
Yeah. We
Yeah.
have also like takes the constitution, right? We're more like the Pitta Vata type constitution. So we're going to see, yeah, more of
More of
that maybe
that.
coming in. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So we've talked about sort of different stages of life, right? Women who are in the fertility journey, that time of life, women who are in their 40s and perimenopause and even after menopause. Can you tell us about like what are the tools that you keep coming back to, the things you keep sharing with women that are working?
Sure. You know, I love empowering people with tools, like real healing tools that they can do at home. Because I know we're going to talk
Yes.
about this more, but when we're going to our gynecologist and we're feeling disappointed, I think it's because it's like, oh, I'm handing over my power and I'm feeling actually maybe even more lost than I was before. The baseline in Ayurveda offers so many self-care, self-healing tools that can be brought into our daily life. But my top ones for, let's say, women's health and that I have utilized and truly feel like they saved my life when I was in really just my lowest times. Like, I'd be happy to talk more about that before, but the three that I tout and people feel really empowered by are Abhyanga, which I know your people have probably heard about, self massage with oil.
Yep.
And pranayama, breathing practices. And Dr. Claudia Welch, who again I'll mention, and you just had on, she's always talking about Nadi Shodhana, alternate nostril breathing.
Yes, that's the pranayama.
But it's just real. But I usually share a different trio. So I don't think it matters what it is, like doing breath work. The breath and the nervous system just are so deeply interconnected. And I also love bringing in some like easy kind of local herbalism and doing nourishing herbal infusions so we can get good nutrition through some of these nourishing herbs like nettles, red raspberry, red clover. And they also have their own gunas, their own qualities when it comes to looking at the doshas. So when I'm talking with a client, we'll usually pick one that seems right or has like the nutrient that they might really particularly need. For example, nettles is super high in iron and magnesium. Milky oats is really high in alfalfa, even though alfalfa doesn't taste that great, you might imagine. It's like, hay for horses, but super high in calcium, those two. And then, the doshic influences. But those are nutrients that women, especially perimenopausal, postmenopausal women, are really trying to get in. And that can be like a bioavailable way to get them in.
Right. By soaking the herbs in hot water.
And yes, thank you. So it's an herbal infusion is really steeping it for like 8 to 12 hours and a good amount of the actual herb. Yeah. Rather than just like a cup of tea. Yeah.
Right. Do you use Ayurvedic herbs as well? Like shatavari, ashwagandha?
You totally could. It is a acceptable written about way to prepare herbs, like one of the Ayurvedic ways, but I'm usually thinking about it of the nutrient value in the herbs. And not that ashwagandha, shatavari don't, but I think I really want to focus on like the iron, the magnesium, the potassium, the calcium. And I know that these leaf and flower really do have that in measurable amounts. Sometimes I'll put a little bit of rose or a little bit of tulsi or a little bit of lemon balm. And those are more for maybe the gunas, like just cooling is rose, right? And tulsi might be a little bit more heating and etc.
Yes. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Which again, folks who have my women's health book, there's some recipes for herbal infusions.
I saw that. I love it. Yeah.
Yeah. Which is fantastic and sort of like an age-old worldwide practice in women's health.
Yes. It comes more from like Western herbalism, European herbalism.
Right.
Yeah.
Which a lot of those things are growing here.
Yes.
Which in the United
I think
States,
people like, and again, feel empowered by, to be able to use plants that are more, maybe feel more approachable, maybe feel like safer, even though there's plenty of extremely safe Ayurvedic herbs, but safer as in like, oh, I can get that at my local herb shop, like a half a pound of nettle leaf or something like that.
Yeah. Right. I love that because that is something that people can just do, just like do it every day. And then you have this drink, that has everything you need in it. Yeah.
And it's so hydrating. I've noticed myself, and I know in Ayurveda, it's like drinking warm drinks is very important. And even when we do this, it can be room temperature, it can be warmed up. But there is something about, like, 'cause I think a lot of us are dehydrated. And again, I know that water isn't necessarily the thing that keeps us hydrated. Like good oils are really important. And I think a lot of women, speaking of hormonal health, might just be drinking a lot of caffeinated tea or coffee, and it's important to get something actually hydrated, like get something else in,
Yeah, right, for sure. So we've got the herbal infusions, some breathing practice, which I like how you say it doesn't even matter what breathing
Yeah, I
practice you
think so.
do. It's not like there's a magic bullet there. It's more that the nervous system and the breath are analog. So we
Yes.
sort of can, affect one with the other. Oil massage, yes,
Yes.
huge, right? And um, I think what's different about these tools, as you're pointing out, that is that women find them empowering, where the experience that I'm hearing about, not always, but in some cases when people approach their provider, gynecologist or primary care about women's health, that the tools that these doctors are trained in is limited and goes pretty quickly to using pharmaceuticals. So what I like to do with folks is say, have we done all these things already that Adena's talking about? Have we already engaged with, tried these things, for a long enough period of time? Like, for instance, can you give me 6 months or can you give me a year with these alternative methods before we start using, whatever the pharmaceutical is? That's sort of my take on it. It's not to say that we can't ever touch pharmaceutical
Yeah.
interventions, but when that's the first place we go, that doesn't seem necessary. And what I'm hearing from you is that a big part of your practice is teaching women healing tools that they do
Yeah.
in their life.
Yes. So just to kind of respond to that is, I think when we go to a practitioner, any practitioner, even an Ayurvedic practitioner, we might not necessarily know all the tools that they have, but I think it can be helpful to be like, okay, if I go to my gynecologist, realistically, like what tools do they have? Like, what are they going to tell me? And
Sure.
really, what they're trained in is drugs and invasive therapies. And those are really important, life-saving sometimes, right? But it's like
Definitely.
if you don't feel ready for that, that's not maybe the first place to go because that's just what you're going to get because that's what they know. That's what they know. And it also, when it comes to women's reproductive health and fertility, when we want to look at or look into the womb space, if we want that or if we need that, I mean, this is the deepest core of our being. It's the deep core of our physical body, and it's also deeply emotional and spiritual. So if it's immediately like okay, there's a problem there. Let's like stick a scope in your cervix. It's like, whoa, that's like, I think we're almost like women are incredibly resilient. And also we might be told from the outside, this is really simple. It's like a very small procedure. You'll be fine to go to work the next day, etc. But to have something up into your cervix and then it's like no big deal. Like it's like it can be really like feel like bypassing a really big experience there. And what I'm trying to say is like I think it's really we're just like used to being poked and prodded in like such a real intimate way. And again, if we need that or if we feel we want that, we have that available. But it's also like a really big deal. Like I see it as a really big deal. And most women who come to me who've had that happen, like are coming to me and they're like sort of healing from their experience with some of those
Yeah.
things. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I hear that. And one of the things I've always loved and respected so much about the way you practice, Adina, is there's a sense of the sacred at the heart of the women's health mission. And I think that's part of what we're missing sometimes as well. Yeah, so I appreciate
Yeah.
that.
Thank you.
So speaking of tools, I'm very curious about yoni steaming. This is something we talked about this back when I was researching for my women's health book, and I chose not to put it in the book as a DIY. I really felt like I wanted people to have more knowledge about who should do this, who shouldn't do this, what are things we need to be careful about or what do we need to really understand about this practice before we take it on. And so at that time you and I talked about, you have a yoni steaming course, so we'll put the link to that in the bio for sure. And I'm happy that, here we are a year later. getting you on the podcast to talk about this
Yeah,
practice. And so I think if many of the listeners are like me, they've never done it, they don't know what it is. So could you just start us out with sort of the 101
totally.
on this?
So, first off, I will say I actually don't have a course recorded right now. So, anyone who's interested at this time, I'd gladly support them in a one-on-one way.
Great.
Because I want to re-record it. I want it to, yeah. Well, and I'll do it again, and it will be a part of the programs I'm offering for the new year, which we'll talk about at the end here. So yoni steaming is an incredibly magical feeling tool. Like some people are uncomfortable maybe with that word magic, but I feel like it's a really wonderful gateway to some self-healing, really focused on the yoni, the pelvis, the womb space. That feels like everyone's talking about it. So, okay, it must be doable, you know. And when I say magical too, is it's working, and I utilize it with clients to work on the physical level, but also on the mental and emotional, and even you might say spiritual level. And it can be to this point of, okay, just get her done, get the steam on the yoni, get the steam on the pelvis, to the point of let's create a ritual around the new moon for releasing, let's say, a traumatic experience or healing from a miscarriage. So we can use this technique, you know, depending on our intention for different reasons. And yes, and I think you have the same perspective, is I want to encourage women to really experiment and practice in their own bodies. And I don't want it to sound like there's any like gatekeeping in a way around this tool, because it is for, let's say, most people to experiment with. There are definitely intricacies, and it's dealing also with steam and hot water, and that can really burn people. So for one, yeah, you know, being aware of that. But really it is about sitting over a pot of steaming herbs and warming the pelvis, and whatever herbs one chooses, which again, it's usually like leaf and flower, to really release the volatile oils. The energy of the steam is going up to bring warmth to the pelvis. And I can keep going on this if you want, or any question. Like, do you have a question about it so far?
Well, I'm curious, like why would we do this?
Why would we do it? Yes.
Yeah.
So the qualities in Ayurveda, right? We're looking at the patterns, and we're looking at the qualities that we see, the gunas. Like, is something hot? Is something cold? Is something rough? Is something smooth? Is something oily or dry? So the qualities of steam are really hot, light, and spreading. That there's more there, but that's what I'm seeing it mostly as.
And moist.
Yeah, I would say moist, except this is the balance where, right, the official guna would be oily versus dry, right? So it's like water, which is steam, is actually dry. So there's a potential that it can be drying in some ways.
Okay, good to know.
But I think of it more of lightening versus building, like Langana versus Brahmana, right?
So like moving stagnation.
For example. So heat does Swedana, which Swedana is sweating, but it's also like opening. It's opening the channels. So that heat, whatever dosha can be supported by this, actually. You know, if there's kapha dosha, right, it's heavy, sticky, and blocking the channels, so you can open. If it's vata, it's like constricting and maybe drying the channels. So there's a blockage there. And pitta, like we want to think about pitta, because I'm cautious if there's a lot of pitta dosha showing up in someone and recommending this hot therapy. But I've also seen, and I know women with maybe with pitta imbalance going on. And I'll say that in the pelvis, there's always vata first. So if we're talking about pitta, it's vata and pitta, right? It starts to get complex fast. But if there's a pitta pattern, sometimes steaming can be okay, because when we open the channels, we reduce like friction and inflammation. Like inflammation gets reduced.
Yes, so right, because it can move out.
Yes, exactly. So pitta could actually clear up with steam, but there's we want to be aware there of how often we're using it.
Right, because it's heating.
Right.
So I hear you saying that, and this is another point I came to in my book, is that probably the biggest instigator in so many of the problems that we have around uterine health and periods, it has to do with stagnation, with the channels are in around the pelvis, in the womb, vaginal canal, all of the also like subtle and minute channels. So if we imagine this is like again, this intricate web, of
Yeah, of
interwoven
mental and
channels.
emotional and
Yep.
energetic. Yeah.
Yep. And like large, obvious channels like the vaginal canal, and then kind of like minute, tiny ones that are like nerve
Yeah.
systems, and so
And all the blood vessels that go from the uterine lining to
yes.
those are included. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Blood vessels are super important when we're talking about a monthly bleed, right?
Yeah.
So I've heard about yoni steaming can be effective in things like short periods as well as long intervals or long periods. It kind of seems like a bit of a panacea from the outside looking at it. It looks kind of like all sorts of problems, can be healed through yoni steaming. Would
Yeah.
would you agree with that?
Yeah. And it's, again, it may take some experimenting and it may feel right for someone and not right for someone else. But also, I think it comes down to, and I think that most alternative, let's say complementary health practitioners must believe that the body is always trying to return to homeostasis. So it's like whatever it's doing is trying to return it to homeostasis, whether it's more bleeding or less bleeding. So it's like this tool is just supportive to the body's ability to return to homeostasis, which means that things need to be able to move, like good lymph, good blood, good nutrition, good hormones.
Mm.
Just need to be able to get where they need to go. And the body's waste products, right? And the alma needs to move out at appropriate
Toxins, right?
times. Yep.
Right. So potentially yoni steaming can sort of assist in the removal of, say, toxins, as well as the bringing of nutrition.
Yeah. And it's because it's supporting the body, which is what's doing that. The body is
Right.
what's moving the toxins out, right? The blood,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. Great. I know I have a dear friend who had a uterine prolapse after her second child, and she's kind of swears by the yoni steaming.
Great. Yes. So I came to yoni steaming, I guess I'll say not through Ayurveda. Not that it isn't Ayurvedic, but I haven't seen it written about specifically as an Ayurvedic classical healing modality, but we can think about it in regards to its qualities and the gunas like we're talking about.
Right.
But I studied Maya abdominal therapy, which is through let's say Maya medicine, but it comes from Belize. It's not as developed or let's say complete system of medicine as Ayurveda is, probably because of colonialism and things just being lost and destroyed. But yoni steaming comes from a lot of different traditions and cultures and places, though. But that's where I learned about it. And when we studied this, they definitely talked about it as very supportive to prolapse. And in the sort of rudimentary, let's say, which doesn't mean it's bad or wrong or even not good enough when I say that, but a simplified way of describing supporting uterine prolapse is that a lot of the herbs that we use end up being like pungent and energetic, like kind of hot or astringent. And the energy of the steam is going upward. And I want to talk about Apanavayu with this as well. But when we see the steam, it moves upward. So in regards to prolapse, my teachers were sharing, it's supportive in uplifting, toning, tightening the tissues because of that astringent quality of the herbs and just the energetic moving upward.
Mm-hmm.
But that's, I think, again, a simplified way of thinking about it. And yes, a lot of women find healing from prolapse with steam. Yeah.
Right. And so if you were using it for prolapse, you might choose more astringent herbs that tone those tissues.
Yeah. Yep, yeah. I would.
Mm-hmm. Right. So the herbs that you're using in the steam can also be appropriate too.
And also the steam itself has the gunas that I talked about. So I think if someone did it in some ways, you might not even have to use herbs because you're getting the energetic of the steam by itself. Right. But the herbs do add another layer to it energetically, but also they have, let's say, a lot of them have antimicrobial properties if we're utilizing steaming for chronic yeast infections, or not even be chronic. You can do it once. You can, if you have a
Wow.
little discomfort down there, you do it once and it might just be the thing to tip you back over into balance,
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's another thing I am seeing with perimenopause, UTIs, yeast
Mm.
infections. Yeah.
And steaming is one of the tools that I use. You can use the same herbs in just like a sitz bath
Yeah.
where it's not as hot, and
Right.
it might be you might even get more of the herbs on the body if you're actually sitting in like a concentrated tea. So I will utilize that as well, depending on the condition. For example, also, like I have a 5-year-old daughter and she's had many sitz baths, but I would never give her steam. It's just too hot for her little body.
Yes.
During
Yes.
pregnancy, you probably shouldn't do a steam, but you could do a sitz bath and get the
Right.
same herbal support if you needed
Right.
it. Yeah.
Right. Right. So again, as we talk, it's like some of the particularities are coming out here.
Yeah.
Right. That
Right.
what a woman wants to use the steam for, you might recommend certain herbs, for example,
Yes.
go in
Certain
there, or you might
herbs.
recommend a sitz bath instead.
Yep. Or a different time of the month, whether you're trying to conceive or whether you're working on painful cycles or whether you have irregular cycles and you might do it around the new moon just to establish some rhythm. So yeah, there are some subtleties, which I do think really, again, it's not like often dangerous unless maybe it's a pregnancy situation because you don't want to add too much heat and increase that flow. But it's about getting the potency of these therapies. It's about utilizing them at the right time, right place to
Right.
really get the benefit from it instead of being like, oh, I did a yoni steam and it was, I'm going to go do something else. I don't know,
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Because we wouldn't just go to the pharmacy and like get some progesterone. Without
and take it every day.
Without anybody like say doing blood work or
definitely a stronger therapy for sure. I mean, that's why Western herbs are so they work because they're really strong. Doesn't mean that yoni steaming wouldn't work, but you know what I mean? Yes, I think we're on the same page. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that in the space, social media podcasts, like there's a lot of information flying around and very often not inside a context that really helps things work, for us. So I appreciate bringing you on to sort of like get a little more background, a little more the rest of the story, and I can see how for a person to invest in consulting with you, even just one time, could help them understand how to, for example, use this therapy, right?
Oh, yeah,
or to
definitely
decide what the best therapy is. So sometimes I think maybe I want to encourage women to consider going the next step to just the DIY, and taking in information that's the circling us in the cyberspace about all the different tools that are available to actually, it doesn't have to be this huge thing. It can even just be to meet with you once or to take one of your courses where you learn something that's specific to your state, to what you're trying to do. That being said, tell us what's coming up for you. Like how could people work with you? What are you offering?
Yes. I do have one-on-one consultations and via Zoom if you're at a distance. If you are, for some reason, within driving distance of Vermont and you want to come see me in person, I do offer yoni steaming at the center now. And oftentimes it's an add-on treatment to the Maya abdominal therapy. We didn't talk about this, but I'm also I'm a Panchakarma therapist, so I'm doing all this lovely body work to kind of balance out some of the online stuff as well. And I've been teaching online classes for years in this stuff. For probably 6 or 7 years, I taught a class just called Womb Healing Tools or the Womb Healing course, where we went really in depth into yoni steaming, castor oil packs, sitz baths, Uttar Vasti, and self-abdominal massage. And for 2025, I am taking it to the next level and doing a practitioner and/or Ayurveda health counselor apprenticeship that will be over the whole year, where we dive into those. We also dive into more advanced herbal formulas and fertility awareness and how to talk about that with your clients, especially if a lot of people are working on their fertility. And this could be to conceive, right? Or to consciously not conceive, and
Yep.
If
Great.
that's relevant to someone. And so we'll take the whole year and we'll also have client case studies and things like that and actually really dive into how to use that clinically. And also, since a lot of women who are not Ayurvedic practitioners want to learn these womb healing tools, and that's what my original course was about, I'm having like another, I'm calling it the Sacred Spiral Ayurveda Collective, where we will learn about these tools, but it doesn't have to be on that in-depth practitioner level, just like the how-to, it's like demystifying these things. And it will also take into account what I mentioned, the herbs, oil, and breath, like all the self-care stuff, but in like a container. If someone didn't want to or weren't able to do like a one-on-one intensive time, they could do it at this lighter level. But yes, for one-on-one work, I usually do my work in a package of 2 consultations so that we have our initial intake. If someone knows they want to talk about yoni steam, we'll walk through all the nitty-gritty. And then we also know that we have a time of email support and a follow-up, just to have it on the books so that you're not just like lost out there in the ethers, you know?
Yeah. When I see clients, I do the same. The twosie. So you know
it's
there's going to be a follow-up.
Important, I think. Yeah.
Well, that's so great. How do you feel about 3 rapid fire questions? I've been closing them with
I'm so
guests.
curious.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you won't be surprised by these questions, but the first one, Adena, is what is the first thing you do when you get up?
Aside from pee, right?
Yes, which counts.
Yes, it counts. So I say it, Apanavayu, listening to that Apanavayu. So I have an electric tea kettle. I turn on my electric tea kettle and I have a kitchen altar. So right over I'm looking at it right now. Right over my sink, because I made an altar here to make myself love doing the dishes more originally, but now this is our home altar. So I light a candle for myself or our family and my children, and then I maybe chant to Ganesh a little bit, and then I light some incense and I bow to the directions. I start with east, south, west, north, above, below, sacred center.
Oh, yay. Oh, that's a good one. Thank you. How about what is the first thing that goes in your body?
Just some warm water, warm to hot water. Yeah. And this time of year, I've been putting some ginger powder in there. Yeah.
Yep. Little ginger powder. Warm things up. Warm up the gut. Yep.
Definitely.
And last question, what is your sort of non-negotiable wind down at night routine?
Good question.
I know you have 2 little kids.
I have 2 little kids, so there's a long bedtime. But so I guess it's not necessarily only for me, but it's important that we shut off our screens at least a half an hour or an hour before we're winding down to bedtime, and then we read. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like fantastic. I read out loud to them. Yeah.
Yep. So screens off. Oh, thank you for those little window into your world, your daily world. I appreciate that. And I appreciate you coming on to share with us your years of personal as well as clinical experience. And we look forward to hearing more from you and seeing more about you.
I love this stuff so much and appreciate you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adena.